goddess rises within me. I am she who ever will be free.
Peachy's
From
here.
troubles and she lifts me. I am she who ever will be free. The goddess in me lifts me up and takes me to the sea, to cleanse and heal the wounds of change that bind me. The goddess in me, I am she who is free. The goddess in me, I am she. The goddess rises within me. I am she who ever will be free. From troubles and she lifts me. I am she who ever will be free.
Good evening and welcome to the Sinister Wisdom reading, celebrating the launch of Sinister Wisdom 124, Deeply Held Beliefs. We just heard the Goddess Chant, written by Phyllis Free and performed by Beth York. My name is Julie Enzer, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's reading. Before we begin, we traditionally make a land acknowledgement. Many of us are in the United States or in other parts of the world living on occupied, unceded land. I am in what is now Dover, Florida, outside of Tampa, traditional homelands and territories of the Seminole. We pause to recognize the histories of war and colonization and to imagine and work for a world where we have a fair and equitable distribution of resources. I encourage you to put your name in the chat, where you're located, and to have conversations with folks in the chat. We have a chock-a-block hour planned for you with plans to wrap up around 8 p.m. on the East Coast, including time for our traditional dance number at the end. If you are not familiar with Sinister Wisdom is a quarterly journal of lesbian literature and art. Since 2012, in collaboration with the Southern Lesbian Feminist Activist Herstory Project, we have published 6 volumes dedicated to telling the stories unearthed by the Herstory Project. All Sinister Wisdom subscribers have received them, and now we have them available to everyone as a boxed set. Here's our beautiful box set with the issues inside it, the Sinister Wisdom logo on one side, and the Southern Lesbian Feminist Activist Herstory Project on the other side. So if you love what you hear tonight, you can order Sinister Wisdom 124 or order the full box set. For those of you who are long-term subscribers to the journal and already have your issues, we can sell you an individual box. Sierra will put the links for doing this into the chat. These ship flat and it's easy to assemble. It's all self-adhesive, and then you can put your issues right into the box. We also, for this issue, because it's such a special final issue for the Lesbian Feminist Activist Herstory Project, made a fantastic poster to celebrate the project and have bookmarks. Everyone received a bookmark with their subscription, and if you're interested in ordering a poster, we'll put information about that in the chat as well. We're delighted to share these mementos of the project and to celebrate the project with you this evening. If you're not a current subscriber, why are you not getting in on all of this lesbian goodness? Sign up today by going to sinisterwisdom.org/subscribe. And if you're able, consider becoming a monthly sustainer. They start at $3 a month, sustaining memberships, and move up from there. You can find out more about the sustainers at sinisterwisdom.org/sustainers. I send out emails every month when your gift comes in with behind-the-scene details and new information about what we have coming for the journal. So a few housekeeping notes. We've all been on Zoom now for over 2 years, but I will make these our simple reminders. Keep your microphone muted throughout the program. If we hear noise from your microphone, we will mute you ourselves. At the end, everyone will have an opportunity to unmute, wave, and cheer. As the program proceeds, if you want to show appreciation for the readers, wave your hands at the end of the readings. Use the reaction emojis on Zoom. Go ahead and test those out right now. And light up the chat. Readers love checking out the chat when they are done reading. And at the end of the program, we will download and share the chat transcript. If you need technical assistance this evening, you can chat with Max Backer, who's on tap for technical assistance. And we are, as always, recording the event this evening, and we'll make it available tomorrow or Thursday at sinisterwisdom.org/SW124. Sierra is putting that in the chat for you right now so that you can bookmark that, and we'll get it up in the next 48 hours. Finally, this issue is in the mail to all subscribers. I've seen lots and lots of posts about it. Lots of people have emailed me that they received the journal. So if your copy has not arrived, it should be arriving soon. If you do not have it by April 25th, in about 2 weeks, send me an email and I will send out a replacement. You can purchase additional individual copies at sinisterwisdom.org/SW124. Please think about friends who might love this issue and share it with them. Now on to our program. Sinister Wisdom 124, Deeply Held Beliefs, is the 6th and final installment of stories collected by the Southern lesbian feminist activist Herstory project. Many of these stories show the intersection of spirituality and religion with politics and social justice movements in the South. During the 1960s, the South was a crucible for civil rights activism that developed and fed lesbian feminist activism of the last decades of the 20th century. I encourage you to check out the complete Oral Historians collection for all of the work that we have done documenting these stories. This evening, we have a number of readers, so I'm talking quickly, trying to get to the main event of the program. You can join me in saying hello to the following Southern lesbian feminist activist Herstory project members: Merril Mushroom, Lorraine Fontana, Woody Blue, Carolyn Mobley-Bowie, Rose Norman, Jenny Yates, B. Leaf Cronwrite, Marian Adams, and Beth York. To begin our program this evening, I'm delighted to welcome a co-conspirator of this issue and an inspiration behind the full series, Merril Mushroom. Merril Mushroom grew up in Miami Beach in the 1940s and came out there in the 1950s. She lived in New York City in the 1960s and has lived in rural Tennessee since the 70s. She has written a variety of prose pieces. Her old-timey bar dyke stories can be found in out-of-print lesbian publications from the 1980s and 1990s. This evening, Merril will read from notes for a special issue. Please join me in welcoming Merril.
Hey, thanks, Julie. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here doing this. This final issue is devoted to our spiritual paths expressed through traditional religious practices and creative work led by spirit, and through political action guided by deeply held beliefs in social justice, the divine feminine, and commitment to preserving and defending Mother Earth. While some political activists have regarded feminist spirituality as a diversion from a narrow view of politics, we see a strong intersection between the political and the spiritual. Political refers to the way we do our activism. In keeping with the definition of the word politic, we try to be wise, prudent, circumspect, and discerning in our work as Southern lesbian feminist activists. Spiritual refers to our lives in terms of physical matters only, but instead relating in ways that are other than those of the material plane. Spirituality refers to the mind, the intellect, the soul. In a sense, our political work that relates to the physical world can be considered sacred, that is, of the soul, the vital force, essence, inspiration. Politics is practical. Spirituality is intuitive. We as women are both practical and intuitive. Politics and intuition blend well in the work we do. In general, the heteropatriarchy has been less than kind to us as women, as lesbians, as feminists, as activists and troublemakers. The fact that we are taking control of important aspects of our lives, our work, ourselves, make the practice and the experience of spirituality a political act, while spiritual practices, rites and rituals, and a belief system can be comforting and can temper the intensity of our lesbian feminist radicalism. Spiritual activism often involves rites and rituals that may be inherent, spontaneous, or deliberately constructed. Political activism involves direct causative action and can be overt or covert. In our Southern lesbian feminist activism, the two are comprehensive. They both imply and contain each other. The intentions in our political acts are spiritual, while the practical manifestations of our spirituality are political. All of this is both contained in and constrained by the society in which we function. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Merril. Reading from the notes for a magazine. You can read the full thing in the issue. Our next reader is Lorraine Fontana. Lorraine is a working class dyke from Queens, New York, a supporter of Black empowerment and an anti-war activist. She first came to Atlanta, Georgia in 1968 to be a VISTA worker in the War on Poverty and later moved there. With other left feminist women, she was one of the founders of the Atlanta Lesbian Feminist Alliance, also known as ALPHA. She later used her legal training at the People's College of Law, at Georgia Legal Services, the EEOC, and Lambda Legal. Lorraine will read this evening from her essay, Christians, Pagans, and Politics, Notes for a Spiritual Timeline from Atlanta, the Alpha newsletter.
Thanks. I'm going to read 4 little tidbits from different sections of that whole piece. The very first reference to anything spiritual in the Alpha newsletter was in its second issue, September 1973, announcing a meeting of the Metropolitan Community Church, MCC, a gay-friendly Christian church founded in California in '69. MCC first appeared in Atlanta in 1972, the same year Alpha was founded. MCC and Alpha were in effect the second and third out gay organizations in Atlanta after the Georgia Gay Liberation Front, which was started in '69. But a gay was the umbrella term used back then until we dykes insisted that lesbian be added to the description of our queer community. During the 70s and 80s here in the South, there was still an emphasis on women's relationship to Christianity and how patriarchal and homophobic Christian denominations were. Whereas MCC was non-denominational, there began to be queer-friendly church groups forming within specific denominations. In a November '75 newsletter is a piece about Integrity, an Episcopal group, who were planning a special lesbian issue. Other gay-accepting Christian groups later formed, such as Dignity, Catholic, Affirmations, Mormons, Evangelicals Concerned, Church of God, Gay Caucus, and Gay Presbyterians. In contrast to those churches in which LGBT folks had to form separate contrarian groups to demand or beg for acceptance, 2 Christian denominations in Atlanta existed from the '70s who were gay accepting: the Quakers of Friends and the Unitarian Universalists. Number 2, references to goddess churches began in October 1975, when Atlanta announced a defense fund for Z Budapest, who had been arrested under a law forbidding fortune telling. The Defense Committee was traveling the United States with a program of dance, goddess worship, women's spirituality, and witchcraft, and wanted to come to Atlanta. Shortly thereafter, an Alpha sister put a bio of Z in the newsletter and asked if anyone else wanted to form a coven. That winter, a solstice celebration happened at the Alpha House for the first time. In March of the next year, the first of a series about women's spirituality, goddess worship, and the prehistory of women's power appeared in the newsletter, with references to such books as Mary Daly's Beyond God the Father and John Allegro's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. The first women's circle at Sappho's Quarry, an old stone quarry east of Atlanta renamed by us, happened that summer solstice of 1976. And the snake goddess of ancient Crete was on the cover that September, which also had an announcement of Witches' Thanksgiving at the Alpha House. 3. An October 1981 piece titled The Judeo-Political Split highlights what had already been and will continue to be unconscious Christian-centric lives within Alpha and the greater lesbian community that made our Jewish sisters' lives invisible and often set events on the same day as Jewish holidays. Quote, ignorance is a majority cultural privilege, and unless Alpha wants to become an organization of white Christians and pagans, it is important to respect the differences among us, end quote. Here again, we see the intersection of religion, spirituality, and politics and social justice. 4. In the January issue of 1980, Alpha received a letter from Susan Sachs, a lesbian member of the Weather Underground, who had been on the FBI's most wanted list for 5 years after fleeing from a bank robbery in which one of her comrades killed a police officer. She had been captured and imprisoned for 2 years awaiting trial, then decided to plead guilty so she could serve time and get out to continue organizing. In her letter, she was worrying about what she saw as, quote, the tipping too far of the lesbian movement toward the cultural. That is going to be debilitating to us politically, end quote. This tracked the wider conflict within the lesbian feminist groups and circles about whether we should be building a women's culture, an alternative cultural world for lesbians outside the patriarchal system, or fighting more directly to break down that patriarchal system and its institutions through direct political action and organizing. Within Alpha, there were women on both sides of this debate and all places in between. Thanks.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. I'm going to deviate from our script. I want to mention 2 things. One is Lorraine is organizing a fabulous event through Sinister Wisdom that will be on Zoom in June, celebrating the 50th anniversary of Alpha. So more information is available about that on our events page, which Sierra can put into the chat. And then finally, I'm going to give you like a super secret tidbit because I've been reading it and it's so fantastic. The fall issue is devoted to Out of Control, which was a lesbian solidarity group in the 80s and 90s on the West Coast that worked to free political prisoners. So that will be our October issue. It's fantastic. Now back to my script. Our next reader is actually a duo, Woody Blue and Reverend Elder Carolyn J. Mobley-Bowie. I'll introduce both of them. Woody will read first and then Reverend Elder Carolyn Mobley-Bowie. Woody Blue was transplanted to Gainesville, Florida in 1992 and grew roots. She is a radical peace activist and lesbian feminist. Women's rights inspired her to blossom as a writer and an artist. Lesbian community is her strength. Documenting lesbian herstory is sacred. Love and hope sustain her in her female-centric world. Reverend Elder Carolyn J. Mobley-Bowie was born as Carolyn Jeanette Mobley in Sanford, Florida. She attended the public schools of Seminole County and later graduated from a Baptist college in Abilene, Texas, and a Baptist seminary in Atlanta, Georgia. In 1981, she was forced out of her career as a Southern Baptist home missionary and joined the predominantly gay MCC, Metropolitan Community Churches, where she was ordained in 1995 and joined the Council of Elders in 2021. She is known best for her singing, which she has often incorporated into her HIV/AIDS education and advocacy work and her social justice activism. Woody reads from the story she wrote about Reverend Mobley-Bowie, and Reverend Mobley-Bowie will read from her interview. Woody?
Okay, well, I'm going to hand the mic to Reverend Carolyn Mobley-Bowie, so she can read from her interview. But before I do that, I want to read a few lines from the story. Okay, when asked, who are your people? Reverend, I get nervous about this part. Reverend Carolyn Mobley-Bowie replied, I have three groups that I identify with as my people. First of all, Black people are my people. You know, that's how I grew up. That was the first way I understood myself in the world, was as a Black person, so Black folk are my people. And gay folk are my people. All gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people are my people because I also identify as lesbian. And church people are my people. I love the folk outside the church too, but I've chosen to train and live and work through the church. And so those are my people. Black folk, gay folk, and Christian folk, even the bad ones among them. So go ahead, Carolyn, take it away.
Thank you, Woody. That was awesome. During the 8 years when I was working as a courier in Atlanta, Georgia, I became involved in the gay and lesbian community on a larger scale. I sang with the Atlanta Feminist Women's Chorus for 10 years. I was one of their soloists and was very active in that group. And even I sang with the co-ed gay and lesbian chorus called the Lambda Chorale. I was active in Pride every year, of course. In 1981, or about there, in 1981, AIDS became a big issue. I had volunteered at the Gay Community Center and I was trained as one of their AIDS educators. I did what they called AIDS 101 with lots of people. And I became a volunteer for the first time for people living with AIDS. I was assigned to a woman who was dying, a Black woman at Grady Memorial Hospital. I only got to see her once before she died. And I chatted with her about her faith and God and how much God loved her. I can only hope it made a positive difference in her life. She died shortly after that. In Atlanta at MCC, I saw lots of people die with HIV and AIDS. I even did several funerals way before I became a clergy person. I was only a deacon, but I had to do a little bit of everything. I did everything except baptize somebody. I was very active as a lay church leader in MCC from 1981 until 1990 when I left to move to Houston, Texas. Toward the end of my time in Atlanta, maybe around 86, 87, I helped to start a group called the African American Lesbian Gay Alliance, ALGA, A-A-L-G-A. At the Gay Community Center, sometimes people didn't speak up against the racism within the gay and lesbian community. I never let that stop me. But it certainly was something that I had to speak up about. It became a hindrance. I think I was one of those African Americans that became the exception to the rule among my gay friends. Well, you know, Carolyn, we like her, but we don't know about the rest of the Black folks. But she can come on in. I didn't like that, really, being the only one. That was true in MCC as well. I was one of a very few African Americans in those days. Only me and a guy named Daryl stayed in the group. But the thing that stands out in my mind about that time when I was in Atlanta was in 81 or there shortly after that, when the First Baptist Church pastor started spewing all this negative stuff about AIDS being God's condemnation and God's punishment of gay and lesbian people, gays in particular, queers, they said. We had to stand against that. And so we did a silent protest, and it was huge. One of the most dignified things I've ever participated in. We met at the MARTA station downtown nearest the First Baptist Church, and we walked from there to that church and then circled the church. It took a whole city block. We held hands and just made a circle around the church facing the church building. Just people lined up all around. We didn't say a word. Nobody said anything, and we didn't do anything, but just stand there. And as soon as the people got out of church, they saw us and they knew what our purpose was. And gay people are not the only people with AIDS. We would have signs saying things like this: God loves gays. Gay people are not the only ones with AIDS. We were singing at the MARTA station as we began, and then we went back and we could sing some more. What became kind of our theme song was the Holly Near song called Singing for Our Lives. And it went like this: we are a gay and lesbian people, and we are singing for our lives. We are a gay and lesbian people, and we are singing for our lives. And we were, and still are. Music has always been a part of everything I've done. From preaching, I'd always do at least one or two songs, to leading rallies and singing with my guitar and leading a whole community in song. That was much like the civil rights movement. We were always singing at all of our gatherings. And so it was with the gay and lesbian people, singing for our lives. Thank you. God bless you for being with us today.
Thank you both so much. You'll see in the chat, someone asked if the Reverend would sing for us, and I was just smiling because I was hoping that she would. So thank you very much. Our next reader is Rose Norman. Rose is a retired professor of English and Women's Studies who has co-edited all 6 of the Southern Lesbian Feminist Activist Herstory Project special issues. As the general editor, she interviewed over 100 lesbians. Now she is writing a book about the Pagoda, a lesbian intentional community and cultural center in St. Augustine, Florida. She's a native Alabamian. This evening, she's going to read to us from her piece, Pagoda, Temple of Love. Please join me in welcoming Rose.
Every day there is a song, every night a gift of love, every moon a celebration. With that quotation on their letterhead, a handful of women ran a women's community and cultural center, the Pagoda, in St. Augustine, Florida, from 1977 until the end of the 20th century. For those 22 years, the Pagoda produced scores of women musicians in their 50-seat theater, plus original plays, art exhibits, workshops, and more, all by and about women. An important reason for its longevity was that Pagoda women had incorporated as a church, Pagoda Temple of Love. The church would sustain their cultural work for all those years and still exists as a federally recognized nonprofit under a new name. You might say they lucked into it or that the goddess sent it to them. Their story illustrates the close relationship between feminist spirituality and lesbian feminist activism. The Pagoda women had barely begun their work when they learned that the only way for a women-only organization to get nonprofit tax-exempt status was to be a church. Enter Tony Head. Tony Head was a leader in the Florida Now who had studied feminist spirituality and female deities and decided to establish a church based on feminist ideas. She and other Now women incorporated the Mother Church in March 1978. A year later, the Now women offered their incorporated church to the Pagoda women. They were not interested, the Now women, in the Wiccan revival that was sweeping the country at that time, but they wanted the church to survive and saw that the Pagoda women could take it in a new direction. Those Pagoda women, especially Morgana McVicker and Rena Carney, were very definitely interested in Wicca and had been influenced by the work of Z. Budapest, founder of the feminist spirituality movement in the United States. Z started the Susan B. Anthony Coven in 1971, the first women-only coven in the United States. In 1975, she applied for official recognition of the Sisterhood of Wicca as a church. This became, in her words, the first incorporated feminist religion in 10,000 years. Tony Head's Mother Church was the second. The Pagoda women changed the name to Pagoda Temple of Love and revised the credo to incorporate principles of feminist spirituality from Z. Budapest's book, The Feminist Book of Lights and Shadows, the founding book of modern Dianic witchcraft. Their feminist cultural center became the prime beneficiary of donations to Pagoda Temple of Love, over time gathering as many as 100 supporters, making monthly donations. Becoming a church was not just a convenient business arrangement for these women. The spirituality of the place is the main thing that many people remember about it. They loved staging rituals to celebrate Hallowmas, the solstices, equinoxes, and other holy days of the pagan year. It wasn't just the formal rituals that made the pagoda a spiritual place. Some musicians experienced the theater in much the same way. June Millington describes her memory of performing at the pagoda like this. Every time I went there, I felt like the women who were there were really hearing my music and receiving it in a spiritual way. I would go into this sacred space, within a sacred space, within the larger women's music world. It was like being in the center of a conch shell, and you could hear the echoes resounding from all of time if you just listened. In 1999, Pagoda Temple of Love sold the building to a group of lesbians who had formed another nonprofit corporation, but it was not a church. The church moved to the mountains of Northeast Alabama and changed its name to Temple of the Great Mother, combining the two previous names. They had great plans for the mountain property that the temple bought adjacent to their new lesbian intentional community, Alpine, which is privately owned. At first, they saw it as a retirement home for aging lesbians, Crone's Nest. In the early days in the mountains, they held ritual circles on the temple land. They still hold occasional circles, as well as memorials there, but their Crone's Nest dream did not manifest. And here I have a new ending for the story that's published in this issue. I'm happy to say that during the pandemic, Alpine Women's Village grew from 18 to 30 residents, and some of them are interested in repairing the road onto the temple land that borders Alpine and resuming the ritual circles on the sacred knoll there. The dream still nourishes lesbian feminist community.
Thank you so much, Rose. And I know everyone on this call are looking forward to your full-length book on the pagoda. Our next reader is Jenny Yates. Jenny is a freelance astrologer currently living in Rockville, Maryland with her Venezuelan wife. She writes all the time, whether it's astrological interpretations, personal pieces, or poetry. For the last few years, she has been working on a novel. Jenny is going to read to us tonight from Circle of Isis. Please join me in welcoming Jenny.
This is called She Changes Everything She Touches, Circle of Isis. There are times when you leave an old life behind and move towards something very different. Almost 40 years ago, Circle of Isis made that possible for me. It was not just a circle, but a threshold. And when I crossed it, I shed my skin. And then I grew another life, a life that centered on women. It was the early 80s. I was 31, a postal clerk living in the burbs of DC with an 11-year-old son. Back then, at the women's bookstore, Llamas, you could pick up a little woman's newspaper called The Crescent. It was here I saw the announcement for a healing circle. And so I went to Jess and Kate's house in Arlington for the first time. At the healing circle, there were perhaps 10 women there, and we split into 2 groups. Every woman took a turn lying on a mat on the floor, her eyes closed, soaking up energy and attention from the women around her. She'd say what she needed, maybe quiet touch, maybe jokes, maybe to tell her story. For every woman, it was different. In that first healing circle, and there were many more later, I first heard Jess sing a song called My Sisters, and tears came to my eyes. I felt that I had heard that song in some other lifetime, surrounded by women. It seemed that I had lost these women, and now I was returned to them. Talking to the women afterwards, I found out about the coven, Circle of Isis, and I was invited to the next ritual for the spring equinox. I was asked to bring 2 symbolic objects, one that encouraged the creative process and one that blocked it. And so I brought a candle and a candle snuffer. I went to many rituals after that and became close to the other members. In that circle, I found both friends and lovers and started calling myself a lesbian for the first time. And a year or so after that first ritual, I was initiated into the coven. The coven was held together by the creativity of its members. 2 weeks before a ritual, we met at a planning session and threw ideas around. We shared what we were working on, personally and spiritually, picked a theme such as joy, justice, or transformation, and figured out ways to dramatize it, to make it real, and to feel it in our bodies. Sometimes we concentrated on a particular goddess or a mythical being and worked out ways to invoke her. Once in a ritual about balance for the fall equinox, we constructed a balance beam and we all walked across it. There was no set hierarchy in our coven. Women volunteered for the position of crone, mother, or maiden, depending on how they felt at the moment. The crone made sure that the ritual moved along, while the mother took care of materials and practical concerns. The maiden made sure that everybody had fun, and she could be silly if she wanted. Sometimes the coven did very deep work, and the maiden would be solemn, but she was the one who lightened the energy again afterwards. One thing I loved about the Circle of Isis was that feelings always came before protocol. If we needed to stop everything and let a woman cry, then we'd do that. Everyone would gather around and embrace her, and this happened more than once. Along with meditating, singing, and raising energy, the rituals always had some time for sharing, either during or after the ritual work. We listened to each other, focusing our energy on each woman in turn, creating a field of trust and acceptance. In that sacred space, protected by ancient goddesses, there was room for self-knowledge, for new feelings, and for transformation. The coven survived for more than a decade, changing as people left and other people joined. I left in 1989, moving to Venezuela with my lover, and starting to work full-time as an astrologer. Without the Circle of Isis, I don't think I would have had the courage to break so completely with my old life. In 2012, my lover, now my wife, and I returned to live in the States. I thought I would find another coven like Circle of Isis, but that hasn't happened. And now it's clear to me how beautiful and generous it was, and how it just appeared for me exactly when I needed it, giving me power, magic, space, and support.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Joining us next is Leaf Cronwrite. Leaf Cronwrite is the crone name of Marianne Hopper. She knows that name claiming and all kinds of lesbian stories are valuable. She came out in 1977 in Memphis, surrounded by supportive lesbians. Now in Atlanta, she hangs out with creative souls who inspire her to write stories set in the South. B. Leaf Cronwrite will read from Wellsprings Festivals this evening.
Thank you. Wellsprings Festivals, 1995 to 97. I met the producer of Wellsprings, Deborah Kaufman, back in 1977 in Memphis, Tennessee, when I was coming out as a lesbian. She introduced me to women who have become lifelong friends. Through the years, she was often talking about women's land and women's gatherings. Finally, in 1995, she decided to create her own festival and hold it on her remote farmland in Northwest Mississippi. She called it Wellsprings, counting on the creativity of women to be shared, to spring up magically through music, spoken word, and art. Deb met artist Harriet Buckley at Meristem Feminist Bookstore in Memphis. Harriet's idea for a festival logo was to create a double women's symbol with waves flowing from the arms above the word Wellsprings for the festival t-shirt. And I still have that t-shirt today, and thank goodness it fits. My partner Drea and I made the 8-hour drive from Georgia each year. Being with old friends and meeting new ones to help create festival was always worth the drive. Deb had mowed her field with a tractor and set up some big tents to gather under. The atmosphere was free-spirited, lesbians feeling we could be ourselves in this remote area, create anything we wanted. Some women brought a huge hoop and blew bubbles through it that floated over groups of the laughing women. We had a drum circle in a sunny field, my first time seeing so many women drummers caught up in an almost spiritual trance. Most of us who attended the first Wellsprings remember how unprepared we were for that cold October night that we all huddled together under a big tent to listen to Mimi, now Mosa Bashevska, sing. Ignoring the cold, some women pitched tents or slept in their trucks or vans for primitive overnight camping, or rented chilly, rustic cabins at a nearby state park. Around 50 women attended that first year. We talked, we sang, we made ritual, we ate, we were out, and we were proud. Yet some rural lesbians nearby feared they would be outed and that their homophobic neighbors would retaliate. It was still a dangerous time in 1995 to be identified as a lesbian. Indeed, a city reporter from the Memphis Flyer, an alternative newspaper, sneaked into the festival and published our location for the gathering and pictures of different women, writing an inflammatory piece insinuating that witches were present, creating magical rituals. Fortunately, there was no retaliation by anyone, but Deb decided that the location had to change the next year. For the following 2 years, we all gathered for Wellsprings at Meeman Shelby Forest State Park outside of Memphis. Many of us tented those years. We had choices of workshops during the day, ranging from drum making to art projects to ritual making. Some of us sat in circles outside and talked of building a lesbian nation. Some played drums and got lost in the rhythms. At night, we had indoor facilities with a stage where women sang or read poetry or danced. With our festival mugs in hand, we often gathered in the chilly fall mornings or late evenings at the coffee and tea station, dubbed the Peanut Butter Cafe, and munched on homemade treats. As part of our registration, each woman selected a beige ceramic mug with a different animal sketched in blue, still have it today, and Wellsprings in the flowing script on the other side. I have wonderful memories of a time when my very resourceful and determined friend Deb created a small lesbian festival that drew women from across the South to feel nurtured, creative, and safe.
Thank you so much, Lee. Marianne Adams joins us next. Mary Ann Adams is founder and executive director of ZAMI NOBLA, the National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging, dedicated to building a national base of power for Black lesbians 40 and over, centering service, advocacy, and community action research. Mary Ann has extensive experience leading research around LGBTQ health and health inequities. She is currently a co-investigator on a groundbreaking study assessing the impact of COVID-19 on the needs of aging lesbians. Mary Ann Adams will read from her interview published in Sinister Wisdom 124, which was conducted by Lorraine Fontana. Please join me in welcoming Mary Ann Adams.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Lorraine Fontana, for your persistence. Growing up in Mississippi, I was always a reader. My Aunt Margaret taught high school English, was a school librarian, and provided a rich education for me. It was at her house that I listened to classical music for the first time and was introduced to a wide range of literature. I would read anything I could get my hands on and was impacted early on by the writings of Black writers, particularly Gwendolyn Brooks, James Baldwin, Langston Hughes, Margaret Walker Alexander, Lorraine Hansberry, Alice Walker, Angela Davis, and Nikki Giovanni. I started reading Essence magazine in 1970 at age 15 when the first issue was published. It shaped my feminist views in ways both large and small. It had an emphasis on race and politics and introduced some brilliant Black women writers to the public. The early 70s were ripe with feminist teachings for me. Toni Morrison wrote her first book, The Bluest Eye, looking at how Black women and girls internalize white standards of beauty. Angela Davis, arrested in 1970, was singularly the most famous revolutionary Black woman of her time. In 1972, when I was in college at the University of Mississippi, Ms. Magazine hit the newsstands. Alice Walker was one of the editors and wrote her first book, The Third Life of Grange Copeland. Immersing myself in all of these magazines and books, I saw Black women who were leading, who were in charge of things, and I wanted to be like them. It's important to note that I also saw women in my community, Black women who were in charge of things. And by things, I mean institutions. Women like Miss Nancy Humphreys, who built and established the only Black library in Oxford, Mississippi, because of Jim Crow laws that enforced racial segregation and prohibited Black people from even stepping inside the white library. I spent most of my free time in that Black library with Miss Nancy, reading and dreaming of freedom. I started identifying as a feminist when I was in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. I was still very much Black identified. I didn't have any Black women openly talking to me about feminism in my community, but they were talking to me through news, magazines, through TV, through books, and through action. I would say probably if I had to rank it, it would be Black and then feminist, because I was very enmeshed in Black culture and Black liberation. In my community, no one talked about sexuality. They didn't talk about sexual orientation. They didn't talk about any of that. Even in college, there were Black gay guys in college, but nobody ever talked about it. When I was 19, even before I fell in love with a woman, I came to the realization that I was a lesbian. I didn't act on my feelings until years later and met a woman who turned me on to the lesbian arts community and broadened my scope of queer writers. I learned about a lot of activist LGBT folk through the gay community news, and I knew I wanted to be a part of the Black lesbian community. That was very important to me. I'd never really seen a group of Black lesbians until I attended a national women's conference at Spelman College in the mid-'80s. Marlene Johnson was doing a workshop on the Black lesbian movement. I could not wait to go to that workshop because that was my first opportunity to be in the room with Black lesbians, period. I remember being so emotionally full, feeling this tangible connection, feeling something I had never quite felt before. That day in that room, it was as though the culmination of everything I had read about and listened to on radio and on tapes came together. I felt that for the first time, I was able to be myself. I don't think I gave voice to anything that day, but I felt as though I could be safe. I was able to take that energy and that affirmation with me to the next step on my journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Our final reader this evening is Beth York. Beth is a retired music professor from Converse College, Spartanburg, South Carolina. Lady Slipper Music produced the recording Transformations. She performed an ensemble piece at national and international women's music festivals. Her latest recording, Finding Home, contains original songs by Beth, Barbara Esther, and Phyllis Free. Beth will read to us this evening from her piece, Transformations.
Atlanta, December 1980. I worked as a clinical music therapist in a psychiatric hospital. I worked with people who speak differently, learn differently, hear voices. The language I use is music. We are musical beings. The ability to perceive and interact with music is ancient and hardwired. We hear a rhythmic pulse and naturally move our bodies in time, catch a familiar melody, remember lyrics that accompany the melody, communicate, attach meaning. Music making is intuitive. Listening, moving, singing songs, improvising, drumming evokes feeling. Music is my partner. We meet, trust each other. Music holds me. Music holds my clients. A grand piano sits in the auditorium of a hospital. Between sessions, my fingers travel randomly over the keys. I wander through possibilities, pouring through my heart, trusting where fingers lead, find melody lines, major to minor modes held in time, become aware of repeated patterns, motives, dynamic motion. I move through these changes, explore new territory, improvise my way through complex emotions. For the next 3 months, I gestate. Something new is taking form, turning me inside out. Judy hears me play piano at Woman Rights, May 1981. She listens, leans over and whispers, "Write it down." Her words strike an insistent chord. I am dreaming sounds, hearing voices. But is what I hear worthy? Am I good enough? I began tentatively, terrified of my own judgments, to notate a piano part. Note by note, from audiation to the piano to the page, resharpening the lead pencil, its eraser wears down to the metal casing. I commit, translating inner harmony and dissonance to notes on a staff. And new voices emerge. I am composing myself. I've never done this before. Strings, woodwinds, percussion. I hear them speak to each other. They pass, meet, blend, listen, move forward. The timbre of each instrument has a part to play, and I slowly give birth to transformations. Here is how I describe it in the liner notes to the Lady Slipper release. Transformations is a piece in 5 movements for chamber ensemble that explores the concept and inevitability of change. The changes that occur within the music are emotional, instrumental, and progress from anger, pain, through humor and paradox, and finally reach a spiritual reconciliation. It is a piece that invites involvement and relationship. A musical expression dedicated to the spirit of transformation that lies within women everywhere. The spirit of personal liberty that urges us to take risks, explore our creative potential. The spirit that promotes the healing of wounds that have embittered us, transforming rage into reconciliation, into vehicles for positive movement. September 26th, 1982, Lucina's music concert with Kay Gardner and Beth York performing with their chamber ensemble at the Atlanta OIC Auditorium. My grandmother is there. My mother is there. We are prepared, confident, and receive a standing ovation from 800 women. Kay is gracious, allows time after the concert. She has just signed with Lady Slipper Records and asks, "Are you planning to record Transformations?" And a little bit later on, the music begins. I am returning to the National Women's Music Festival, 1984, and Transformations is performed at the Sunday Showcase. My fingers tremble and fly over the keys. I'm confident, secure. By the second movement, I am transported. The sounds are beautiful, cannot be contained. The audience rises at the end. The applause continues, and Kay Gardner emerges from the audience, walks down the aisle, a priestess in a long flowing robe, arms outstretched, embraces me. I move through the crowd to the green room where I sit, lower my head, and weep tears of joy, taking it in. Transformations expanded and transformed me. Composing gave me strength and took me to places I never imagined. I introduced the last concert of Transformations in Atlanta this way. Don't forget the women who worked long hours for little or no money to bring women and lesbian culture to you. Orchid Productions, 7 Stages Theater, the Southeastern Arts Media and Education Project, Lady Slipper Music, the Atlanta Feminist Women's Chorus. Don't forget, there would be no concerts without each musician here who brings life to the voices in my head. I thank each one of you tonight. Without you, there are no recordings, no concert, no audiences. If we are to survive as a women's culture, as a community, we must acknowledge and value each other's contributions. If we don't value each other, I am afraid no one else will. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Beth. And thank you to all of our readers and to everyone who participated in putting together this issue of Sinister Wisdom. Please make plans to join us for 2 forthcoming events, a discussion with the director of the film Womantown on May 10th, and then a celebration of the full series of these issues on May 24th. Both events are at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll also be celebrating Cheryl Clark's 75th birthday on May 16th with a live Zoom event. More information about all of these events is at sinisterwisdom.org/events. Remember, the video from this evening's event will be available on the Sinister Wisdom website tomorrow or Thursday. We're putting the link in the chat. More Sinister Wisdom events are available at sinisterwisdom.org/events. As always, for our final song, we have The L Word by songwriter Carol Kramer, performed by your girlfriend and produced by Esther Records. As you listen to the music, please stand up and dance. We will highlight videos, and when the music ends, I end the Zoom call. Thank you all for joining us, and now let the dancing begin.
Violence against lesbians and gays has increased every year since the start of the AIDS crisis. We still fear losing our jobs. We are denied places to live. We are here today to say enough is enough. We are ready to live as full and equal members of society, and we are ready to fight for our freedom.
So give me an L, give me an E, give me an S, give me a B, give me an I, A, N. Everybody say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian.
This is a significant time in our community and our visibility as a movement. We must be strong and proud and out.
The next time you say the L word, think of the woman next to you, or your teammate on the soccer field, or the wise one that's helping you through. And think of your high school basketball coach, or your last music festival crush, or your ultimate erotic fantasy. It's okay to blush. Or find a mirror, look yourself in the eye, and with warm regard, say the L word, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. mama say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian. Come on, say lesbian. Everybody say lesbian.
Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Everybody.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.